Welcome to Multifamily Rockstars. If you are new to apartment investing or already experienced, you will enjoy this show. You will hear from the leading experts in multifamily real estate so that you can be a better owner, operator, and investor. Real people, real stories, life-changing. And now, your host, Ryan Christopher Nunes.
Well, welcome everybody. Today we have Ryan Wehner from Wehner Multifamily. Ryan is the founder of Wehner Multifamily, a full-service property management company with the mission of establishing honest and competent management services for B and C class apartment communities. Ryan's company manages over 25,000 units across 177 properties. Ryan, thanks so much for taking time for us today. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Ryan. I appreciate you inviting me.
Why don't you tell listeners a little bit about yourself?
So I'm a founder of Wehner Multifamily. I founded the company about 13 years ago. I'm originally from Southern California. Maybe I'll tell you a little bit how I kind of fell into the business.
That's great.
More or less. I grew up in Orange County in Seal Beach, small beach down between Long Beach and Huntington Beach, and went to UC Santa Barbara. I graduated in 2000, and after a 5-year vacation/party, it's been pretty much a 20-year sprint ever since. Right out of college, I went into I was a financial analyst, and within about half a year, I was doing very well in that business financially, but I lived in a trailer in an industrial park and saved all my money and bought duplexes and single family homes and condos and such in Southern California, and started doing that around 2001. Came into, I remember a little bit long story, but about fourth quarter of 2005, the lady that cleaned my apartments, Rosa, very nice lady, she was very excited, said, "Mr. Ryan, I'm buying a house." And she proceeded to tell me that she put together, she got a $470,000 stated income loan, very little money down. And I was like, "Congratulations." But as I left, I said, this can't end well. So that hour, I decided that I was going to sell everything and redeploy the capital somewhere else in the United States. And so I looked across the United States and looked at various factors, and I was very interested in the DFW market, and I had some interest in Atlanta as well. I kind of fell on the DFW, kind of fit my personality a little bit better, so I ended up kind of planting my seeds here and started looking for deals to do a 1031 for my all the sales that I had. And I ended up buying an 80 and a 60 unit here with the idea that I have it third party managed, and I'd go down to Costa Rica, surf, and start another business. So best laid plans, it didn't work out that way. I ended up firing my third party management company about 3 months into the assignment, not very diplomatically. Started self-managing it, and it turned out very well. One became a grand slam, the other one was a solid double. And then I met my wife here in Dallas, and so I just started, representing buyers from South Florida and Southern California. And every time they came out, we'd put a deal together. They really mandated that I managed it. So I got kind of pulled into the business, kicking and screaming. It wasn't a big plan to be a property management company. After, I started picking up contracts around 2006, maybe the end of 2006, and still brokering deals on the buy side. And 2008-9 happened. I think we all remember that.
Sure.
It's a pretty traumatic economic event, and it was really hard to put any deals together. And so I just kind of refocused and reshift my efforts to grow the management side of the business, which was more steady. And I focused primarily on C and back then even D class properties, and took over a lot of foreclosures. Just really focused my energy in building the team there. I'm a firm believer, it's laughable to make long-term plans. You really just need to constantly progress and maintain your momentum and see the opportunities as they come along. So went into that. Fast forward, another 10, 11 years. all based on referrals and references and market reputation. We've grown to, nearly 26,000 units. I'd have to look at the clock. I don't know if we're at 26 right now or a few hundred under. We have over, I think we're right at about 1,000 employees now.
Wow,
so that's
impressive.
the story of the management side. Construction side, very similar genesis to that business. And that was probably about 9 years ago, where we, due to a client's issue with other general contractors and stuff, we provided those services, and it kind of sprouted another business on the construction side. And then about 6 years ago, maybe a little bit more than 6 years ago, I started traveling out to China, building relationships and contacts to import products direct from factory. And so it started off really just on the flooring side. And within, I think it was about 3 years ago, where I was able to finally persuade a certain person to work for me in Guangzhou, China. And we've kind of built out our other product line. And I think we have about 20 SKUs. Very high quality products that we've designed and built with better quality, more durable products, and we price them the same as distributors. And it was a good model. They're exclusive to our clients, and it was a good business model because we were able to cut out a lot of the middlemen, provide a better product for our clientele at the same pricing. So it worked out very well. We primarily do C and B class assets. We're about 50-50. They could sprinkle a few A-class properties in there, but that's not really our bread and butter. Our real areas of influence are spheres of influence, and areas geographically of influence, and where we actually do business is, all of DFW and Denton County and all of those areas. And then we're in Oklahoma City. We have about 5,500 units there. We have a large presence in San Antonio, about 1,000 units in Austin, and then we're down the I-35 corridor between Dallas and Austin. We also have about 700-800 units in Abilene and about 500-600 units in Wichita Falls.
Okay.
So that's kind of our sphere of influence, is those areas.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. So tell us a little bit about, you said the B and C class is what you focus on. What's different about that versus the A class in terms of, why you focus on B and C?
So the C and B class, obviously the yields are better for investors. There's more, for lack of a better term, sweat that you can put into it to affect change and results. And so you have a little bit more of, you have a lot more of impact on the success of an investment. They're much more, they tend to be older assets, up to about the 70s would be considered C. And B, some of those lines are a little bit blurry, but they tend to be older assets that have a larger maintenance element to the overall operational management. And they, that's the main goal of that's the main reason that we've gravitated towards that business. The A-class assets there's a lot of people that do very well in A-class assets. Obviously, they have lower cap rates, lower yields, and lower cash flows, and they're more centric to other variables that Wehner isn't the best suited to be highly above their competitors.
Okay. And then, just kind of going into what differentiates you from, you've grown your business very quickly. What differentiates you from other property managers out there?
There's some great business ideas. We can kind of go into those, and, at the end of this, I'll put in a plug for our website, and they can go watch our 10-minute video and find out our due diligence and our technology. So we can kind of get into that later, but, primarily it is creating the best culture and team in this space. That's going to be in building a culture of growth within. That is really what's going to be the determining factor. I would say that's probably 90% of the value assessment, is building the team, people that treat the client's asset and finances like it's their own. That's really what's the change. And the reason I say this, and when people see our video and we kind of talk about my technology a little bit, they are technologies that were built, they're proprietary technology that we built to solve problems that we have already ran into. None of them were built before the problem showed up.
Sure,
I'd like to say I was that good, but it's always about fixing, making sure another problem that we've already went through doesn't occur again. But and so that helps us scale and be more organized and methodical in our growth and in our management. But really, at the beginning of my company, we were doubling every couple of years, and I didn't have the technology. And we had very satisfied clients. And really, it all boils down to the people that you have, both on the supervision side of it, in the back office, and most importantly, the person who's sitting at the office at the property. I mean, you can have a great, you can have great systems, technologies, processes, and if you don't have the right person sitting at the front desk in the office, it's all for naught. On the flip side, you can have systems and processes that are not optimal. And if you have the right person in the front office, it tends to work out all right anyways.
And so, Ryan, you mentioned 1,000 employees, and you said 90% of it is creating a great culture, and a large part of that is human capital. So how do you bring in the right people, filter out, the good and the bad, and keep and train, retain the ones that you
Well, that's a loaded question. We could talk for 5 hours about it. I'll summarize. I mean, there's obviously when you've had somebody who's grown, like our director of construction started with me, and this is a pretty big example, and I can talk about Fernando as well, but he started with, he was my third hire. He was a maintenance person. And then gradually I needed assistance on other things. And he was one of the maintenance people that always floated to the top. He had put the most effort. He did the after work classes and Excel and other things. And he really had the ambition. And so you can pick from your current stable based on what, of employees, based on what their ambition and work ethic is, and probably secondarily what their competence and IQ is, right? So the most important is you need somebody with ambition, who's honest, has the integrity. You can teach a lot of those other things in this business. We're not building rocket ships. We're changing out toilets, fixing light fixtures, and filling leases out.
Sure.
And so it's just really about having that attitude of problem solving and doing it with integrity. And really, I'm a firm believer in the golden rule in terms of business. Treat people the way you want to be treated, both tenants, vendors, clients, and coworkers.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Appreciate that.
The other way, the way that we get it is we do funnel hiring. It's very difficult to, for instance, we just hired a CFO. She went through 20 hours of interviews between 5 different people, had to take a personality test. Wow. So when we hire outside of the company, especially for those leadership positions, it's a beating to join the company. On the regional side, I would say 90% of them started off as managers of ours, and grew from there and put a few extra responsibilities on them, see how they dealt with those and the pressure, and to see who floated to the top. The outside hires, we go through the same process. It's a very, very involved 3-pronged hiring process, and we've actually improved a lot of that over the last year, and with some extra human capital that we have on board. In terms of we do have a partnership with a group that has helped us immensely in that side, to make sure that we don't make the wrong hires that we're making outside of the company.
Sure. And at the end of the day, it's a people business for you.
It is. Almost every business is a people business, whether people want to admit it or not.
Sure. Absolutely.
Very few businesses that are primarily widgets that you're selling, right?
Yeah. And then, as we just finished January, heading into February, what are your goals for this year? And then if you could talk about that, and then the next 3 to 5 years.
Well, our goal, I would say, like I said earlier, I don't do 5-year plans.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, right. But I can tell you what our short, medium-term goals are. And that's about that's what I believe in. I don't believe in 5-year plans, because different opportunities come and you may go in a little bit different direction. But I would say in terms of that 1 to 2, maybe 3-year thing. So in this year, we really have a goal of improving a lot of our back-end KPIs, our financial reporting systems, and just some of our overall reporting and communications, and shore up some of the positions that fulfill those roles. So I would say that's a huge kind of general thing that we want to accomplish, and we have KPIs in place to monitor our success on a weekly and monthly basis. In terms of growth and what markets we'd like to be in is we really want to continue on the same path that we've been in, the same growth format that we've been in DFW and Oklahoma City. We think that we're at a pretty good growth rate in those markets. And then we really have, put together a great team in San Antonio and Austin. And so we'd like to really focus this year on growing in those markets substantially and, at a higher rate than we have over the last couple of years. Austin, we're pretty new to the market, but we've achieved a lot of success there already in terms of the assets that we're managing. And then by the end of the year, and maybe earlier than the end of the year, we'd like to focus on Houston and really make that. And as a loss leader, I mean, we'll have a large staff there, even without a lot of clients, until we can grow our presence there. And we know that we've seen the competition. We've seen that there's a lot of places to have a more competent management company in that C and B class area in Houston. And so that's probably the main goals that we have through the end of this year. And then following up in the 2021, 22, we'd like to, based on how Houston goes and seeing how the growth works there, we may get into a position where we expand to some new markets. But we're going to kind of play that by ear.
Okay. No, it sounds like you kind of.
Sorry if my answers are too long-winded.
No. These are great. This is great, Ryan. Really appreciate it. You talked about KPIs, so maybe we could just unpack that a little bit. What, for operators dealing with your property management company, what are your suggested KPIs to focus on, and how would you structure weekly calls to?
So each deal is different. If you're looking at a major renovation on a property, you're going to have different KPIs than if you're trying to sharpen the pencil and add 5% in NOI. So they're going to be different in both scenarios. But would say some of the very, very basic stuff is tracking, your occupancies, to get to your occupancies and collection rates. We kind of boil down into a little bit more detail. The KPIs I focus on when I'm looking at a troubled asset, one that could be one that I personally own, is I want to focus heavily on what the turnovers were for that month. I'm not even a huge fan of focusing it on a week-by-week basis, because first week there's a lot of turnovers, then there's almost none, and then the leasing is more spread out throughout the month. But on a monthly basis, I want to see, how many turnovers did we have, how many did we pre-lease, and how many units did we get ready? How many units were made ready? Do we have product to lease when there's an issue with turnover? If I've just bought a deal and I have a huge turnover where it's annualized at 120%, so we have just a huge amount of people moving out in the first 2 or 3 months, I don't focus on, occupancy when we have a huge amount of turnover. I want to focus on, are we getting the units ready quickly? And are we getting a lot of traffic, and is our marketing, hitting pay dirt? If we have a lot of people coming through the door and they're not leasing a lot, we'll probably have a shopper go there and see if there's something wrong with the manager. If there's not, I may have to reevaluate if we have the rents set too high. But really, I just want people to be making the phone calls and coming through the front door. And if that happens, they're going to close, 30 to 40% of those, and we'll be fine. So I know I'm getting a little bit convoluted here, but I don't focus on.
No, this is fantastic. I think
it goes from 95 to 85, but that's because we had 20 move outs, and that there are people that we've inherited from the last ownership. then I don't get mired down in, well, why couldn't we keep them? And if a lot of the people aren't paying, we just want to clean them out and make sure that we're leasing at the things that we have control over, which is getting units ready, the building looking nice, and the units leasing. Then within a couple, 2-3 months, it's going to stabilize. So it's a leasing, pre-leasing, unit preparation.
Okay.
There's a whole nother layer when we have construction, when we add a large construction project to the mix.
Okay.
And so that can be, what is the timing of this? And we have all of the contractors on board to do this, to improve the curb appeal, to be able to lease. And so sometimes those are things that are even more than a weekly phone call.
Okay.
So
got it.
those might need, 2 or 3 times a week, updates.
Okay.
If we have something that has a lot of moving pieces, we really mandate it with the client on the front end to do at least a formalized weekly conference call. And we really want those times to be committed to, and everybody to really make those formalized appointments. 9 out of 10 times, I know things pop up sometimes, but we don't want those being floating meetings. In between that, if there's other things going on, then you'll have the regional or the director of construction or the regional construction supervisor's cell phone, and you can follow up with things on a couple times a week or whatever. But we really want everybody to be committed to kind of size up the property every single week at the exact same time. In my experience, when it's a floating appointment, it equals to it not happening almost ever.
Okay.
Everybody always has a good reason why they have to miss a meeting.
Sure. So kind of, and then for those fixed appointments, what is your suggested agenda to make those meetings as efficient as possible between the operators and your property management company?
Again, that's if there's a lot of construction, you spend half your time on the construction. And it has to have a little bit of flow, which is you spend half your time on the construction, or if there's city inspection that has to occur or whatever.
Okay.
But if there are many issues and hanging chads, if you will, in terms of leasing and work orders and stuff that the on-site operations, then you'll do about half and half. If there's almost no construction element, maybe only a roof needs to be replaced in a certain corner of the property, then you focus most of your energy on the leasing. And then if it gets to a point where you've stabilized, you're up to 95%, maybe you're at or exceeding your budget on revenue and expenses for a couple months, then it does not make sense to talk every week.
Sure.
It ends up just being something where everybody goes, "Hey, how you doing? How was your weekend?" And they spend 5 minutes on a phone call.
That's a good problem to have.
Yeah, that's good. And that happens a lot. Couple months in, 3 months in, and if everything's going as planned, then you just do a kind of a weekly assessment on a scorecard, almost like a dashboard.
Okay.
And that's a good use of everybody's time.
Yeah, that's great.
Otherwise, people start going through the motions, and then they miss things.
Sure. In terms of incentivizing staff at the property, or what are your tips, or what's your kind of suggestion?
So everything like that should go through, and we've certain people have tried other things. I think it helps them. Other owners want to go incentivize the on-site employees themselves. That usually shoots them in the foot.
Okay.
It's better to go through the group that has had thousands of employees, at least several hundreds for the last 7 years.
For sure.
We know that employee profile. We understand what works, or we're going to have a better idea. I wouldn't say we always know what works, because people are a big variable every time, but we will have a much better idea on what works on those type of profiled employees. And the way we look at it, and what I typically like to do is, I really want the manager, in terms of the maintenance, they can have certain bonuses when they're under 3 days on every work order for a certain amount of time, or whatever. You can work with your maintenance supervisor to see what that property needs and to schedule bonuses based on those property needs. In terms of the manager, I'm a firm believer that the key to the inside the office management staff should be motivated by certain revenue goals with certain daylights to them. So, we're here in January, and say we go to Acme Apartments, and it's collecting $50,000 a month, and we know when it's at 95% full with 3%, 3% or 92% economic is like that thing firing at all cylinders. And at that number, instead of being at 50, we should be at 60,000. So we'll go to that manager and say, hey, look, if you can get to 60,000, we have a bonus structure that goes through the end of June. You can hit 60,000 before the end of June, you get $2,000 bonus. If you hit it 2 months in a row, you get another 3,000 on top of that. That kind of encourages stability of tenants.
Sure.
So every property is different, but we want them to have end periods in terms of dates and be on revenue goal. So what's benefiting the property owner is how they get bonused.
Sure.
I'm not a firm believer in you get a leasing bonus and a pre-lease bonus, because on-site staff know how to manipulate those numbers.
Okay.
And they'll tend to lease up properties with tenants and then we have a lot of turnover, and you can put together really convoluted spreadsheets to try to stop that. They can always find a way to get around that. You can't get around of what clears the bank benefits us all, right?
Yes. Yeah, no, that's great.
The other thing, another shortfall that people try to tie a manager's bonus on the NOI. And it seems logical, but I really don't want the manager focused. We have a bunch of other stopgaps on what they have to get approvals for every expense. And we can control expenses as much as they can be controlled through our system, policies, and procedures. We don't want the manager to be focused on, oh, I want to hit a certain NOI, so I'm not going to fix that toilet, or I'm not going to spend money on this, or we want them focused on pushing the revenues, being, collecting money, leasing apartments, collecting the money. Because, that's what moves the needle the quickest. And we can have other teams focus on keeping the expenses in line.
So Ryan, it sounds like collections based is what you've, like to implement for the on-site managers, and then more maintenance request based for the maintenance staff. Is that correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Nice. That sounds great.
It could be, on the maintenance side, I just kind of hit the few top points. It could be, time that a vacant to when it becomes, when it's a down unit to made ready. It could be based on timing on that. And every property is different. So sure. I wouldn't want to summarize it always the same.
Sure.
Because there could be different things that are affecting the property that would be beneficial for the owner to have done quickly. Then you throw a carrot to get those things done quickly.
No, that's great. But it sounds like high level of suggestion to work with your team directly to figure out what compensation or incentive plan is best for the property.
Yes.
Rather than kind of
going, it doesn't work well.
Got it. And then when people are interviewing different property managers and choosing between to go to one firm or the other, what would you say are the most important, let's say, 3 questions to ask?
Some of the most important answers to get, I don't know that they don't always have to be, you don't have to get the answers from asking the question sometimes, but the most important 3 factors, I would say, primarily I would make sure that that they have a decent presence in the market already, and that they have a large team there. Already. I think that's a very important thing. Obviously, talk to their references and so forth. I think that those are the 2 main things. I'm trying to think of the third. I would say another element is just make sure that you are getting a team that specializes in the type of asset that you have. So I don't think a 20-story high-rise in Uptown would be best managed by Wehner Multifamily, right?
Sure.
And I also don't think a C property in Oak Cliff would be best managed by Post Properties.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Sure.
So
everyone has
want to
their
have
niche
what their niche is. Do they have presence there? And, do they have a reasonable reputation? Right?
That sounds great. Just kind of appreciate all the color on, the on-site staff and property management. Just switching gears a little bit to market. So you've bought some deals in DFW. What are your thoughts on the market over the next year or so? And what are your favorite submarkets in DFW?
It's hard for me to tell you what are my favorite submarkets in DFW. I can tell you a few areas I would avoid.
Okay. Yeah.
But I don't want to go too much into that.
Okay.
But,
Okay.
Southeast Dallas is an area that is very hard to be consistently successful in. So, down Fair Park and areas like that, there is a formula to be successful, but it's more difficult. It's more difficult to be consistent in that space. I would say that some of those higher crime areas, what people need to consider, and this is the experience I had in 2009-ish, 2010, is when you're in the more criminal, very low socioeconomic areas, those type of assets, whenever there's a drop in liquidity or there's a recession, those areas get hit the hardest, the quickest. They become the most illiquid in a corrected market.
Okay.
And so if you have something that's in uptown, it's not going to be as affected to the same degree in terms of valuation as if you're, off the 175 in a very criminal neighborhood. Those are going to become almost illiquid assets. Okay. And it makes sense because people have where the money's going to go to is going to become more selective on the deals that they buy when there's less money, when there's less liquidity.
Sure.
And so the ones that get hit the hardest are those more difficult markets. So I would be careful that when you're looking at a offering package and it shows a 2% higher cap rate today, I don't think that's a good payoff to be in a very dangerous neighborhood.
Interesting. Okay.
Long term, okay, because the liquidity doesn't maintain in those markets. So that's one thing. I can kind of hit some other areas. Anybody want more detail on that, they can contact me directly.
Okay.
Where I think in terms of certain areas. I would say in general for the overall market, I think that there's going to be, and I'm looking at the same economic data that you are, and what I would say is that there's probably going to be, we're not going to experience the same rent growth based on new housing deliveries, new apartment deliveries, and just a few other factors in DFW. I do think there's still opportunities that if you go and fix up a building, there's opportunities to raise rents in that sense, but just overall macro growth, I think is going to flatten off or go up a little bit, but not a lot. So the deals that we're underwriting now, we're being more conservative about our year 2 and 3 outlook.
Interesting.
That we're not growing the revenue, and that's just based on economic data that we've received.
Okay.
So that's what I would say. I would say operationally, most of these deals are going to do fine. In terms of the macro events, what's going to happen with Fannie, Freddie, the financing market, I have no clue. And if I knew, I wouldn't be working for a living. I knew the future. I wouldn't be working for a living. I can assure you that.
But no, those are great points. On the being more conservative for rent growth, what are you forecasting? I guess after the year 1, you're doing the rehabs. Year 2, 3, what for B and C and DFW?
We'll do. Look, what we're doing now on our year 1 on our preliminary forecast, and then when we go through the due diligence and doing year 2 and 3, we're showing a flat in terms of macro growth. Now, if there's rent growth based on, hey, if we put in granite countertops and we put in the backsplash here, the neighbor's getting $50 more with those improvements, we'll still underwrite those rent increases. What we're doing is 0 rent increase in the overall macro.
So 0%. So let's say you do your rehab, and then after you do that rehab, you're forecasting 0% rent growth after the rehabs are done.
No. So if we do a rehab and it will raise rent based on a rehab, based on what the market's already bearing, but we will underwrite no macro, no economic, like in DFW in 2015 and 16, you could have done nothing and rents grew 7 to 9%.
Sure.
That 7 to 9%, we're not underwriting 1 or 2% or anything. It's a flat on the macro growth. If there's something conditioned to the property, some condition of the property that we're going to improve that is going to bump rents, then we will underwrite those rent numbers.
Got it. So just to be clear, the organic rent growth, organic rent growth, I guess, that's non-rehab, just classic rent growth. You're just assuming 0.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
yep. That is correct.
And then, for deals that you've reviewed or you underwrite, what are the things that you look for when deciding to spend more time on an opportunity?
If I'm looking at something myself,
yes,
it's typically went through my COO already and been reviewed, and it's kind of hand delivered to me with a rubber stamp thing. Fernando and I invest together a lot in a lot of these deals.
Okay.
A lot of what we look for, a lot of things that I look for in terms of investing is, certainly it's very critical and important, the cap rates and current income streams, and where that can, in a forecastable way be improved or not improved. That's definitely one aspect of it, but I focus a lot on price per pound for the asset. I like to buy ingredients versus just an income statement, right? I really primarily look at ingredients first, and then I see if the income statement will support some debt on it, if that makes sense. Yeah, so if I see an asset, and let me just give you a short example. Let's say we have a cross street, and on one corner is one apartment building, 100-unit 80s product. Caddy corner to it is another 100-unit building, same vintage product. And I see one that has a $400,000 NOI, and I see the one that's caddy cornered has a $200,000 NOI, but their condition, they're about the same, or maybe there's just a little bit difference in the physical condition. I don't believe that the caddy cornered one is worth half of what, that the one at 200,000 is not worth half of what the $400,000 one is, right? So I'll actually gravitate towards the deal if it has a bigger discount, because I know I can change the management, but I can't change the physical aspect of the asset without spending a lot of money, and I can't change the location or the age of the asset. What I can change is the tenant profile, the management. That costs money, but it's pennies to the dollar compared to physical asset, physical quality, and there's no workaround on a $500,000 roof replacement. It just has to happen, and that's what roofing and costs, right? There are creative things that you can do on management to improve it at a quicker rate, and so that kind of gives you an example of why I would gravitate to the one that actually is collecting less money and maybe is 30%, maybe at a 30% lower valuation, it still has a lower cap rate than the perfectly humming deal.
Yeah, no, that's, I like the word ingredients that you look for. That's what other ingredients, I guess, what would you say were those?
So it's obviously the most cliche is location. It's pretty cliche, right?
But it's true.
Physical, yeah, but it's true. Then the physical quality of the asset, is it a chill or is it separately metered? What do the windows look like? Is there issues with drainage on the property? Is it pitched or flat roof? Kind of look at those sorts of things. And then third, I look at the income statement and the rent roll and the tenant profile.
Okay.
If I would rather buy an asset personally that was 50% occupied with decent tenants than an asset that is 90% occupied where 40% of the tenants are bad.
Sure.
It just costs me money to get them out. and beat up the property. I'd rather them not be there, right?
Yeah, for sure. And you bring up a good point on the tenants. So, what can operators do to de-risk, that takeover process where typically you hear about this occupancy drop, and to figure out what tenants are really paying, what are good tenants?
Some control of that. I know you don't want to hear this. Some of that, it's part of the marbling in the steak, if you will. You can't really cut it out sometimes. So especially in this environment where it's very competitive to find a deal, and it's very prevalent for there to be a lot of pressure to keep it full through the transaction, that standards will tend, not in every case, to be dropped to make sure that closing process or even the sales process works well, right? So that is human nature. Trying to change human nature, I think, is a fool's errand. So what I would say is the best avenue to combat the hangover from that, if you will, is to be prepared with contingencies. If you're raising money, you're educating your investors that, look, we're not giving a pro forma with the first 3 months, just a constant uptick, that it's going to have a dip or it could have a dip. Just have that, underwritten and communicated to everybody whose money is going to be involved in the asset. If it doesn't happen, which sometimes it doesn't, then it's great news you get to share with everybody.
Sure. No,
if it does happen, like it does 3/4 of the time in the market that we're in now, then you're prepared. And as long as you're prepared, those 2 or 3 months of cash flow or feeling really good about handing a cash to investors, on the overall IRR over a 2 or 3 or 4 year exit, it's not even going to have a half a point effect, if even a quarter. Just do the math. Calculus isn't that difficult on that. So it's really go in there with the focus of tearing the Band-Aid off. And if it's in that 10% range, feel lucky that that's what you got, that you only had 10% of not perfect lease up, if that makes sense.
Okay. So a 10% occupancy drop, or?
Yeah, or just 10% of the tenants.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you may have a good leasing month. Look, if you close a deal on September 30th, you're going in, or let's call it October 15th, and then you have that 10% drop and you're going through November and December, which are the worst leasing months, it may be a 10% drop. If that happens in April or May, you're probably not going to have a big drop because you're going to lease a lot during that summer period. But in the overall scheme of things, we can't hyperanalyze 2 or 3 months. The only reason you'd have to do that is if you overpromise and overcommitted to your investors. And if you do that, you end up doing things that are not good to the overall health of the asset. But that gets you into a position is you want to communicate 95% full in month 2. Well, how do you get there? You have to continually leasing. You have to continually have a low leasing criteria, and it's like a laundry machine. It's tenants go in, tenants come out, and really to be able to stabilize a tenancy is where the property becomes like an ATM.
Sure. So it sounds like, just to recap that, there's a lot of good nuggets of information there. It's just account for wider economic vacancy in the underwriting for year 1. Kind of
contingency period. Like you go through and they've patched a leak that they've had that they know is an issue, and you take it over, and 2 weeks later, it causes the $12,000 boiler to bust. And we've done the due diligence, but they didn't see it or whatever. You just got to be prepared for contingency on the front end.
Sure.
And there's no excuse for it in month 6 to 12 for the people operating the business. But you have to put yourself into this visor of, some people go, well, they didn't hit the number, and so we're going to move on to somebody else. Be careful. You might get somebody worse. A lot of times you do, right? Sure. Sometimes the person that you think made the mistake is really the only one that you have that is going to be able to fix it.
Sure.
And so we're business people.
Sure.
I keep people employed that make mistakes a lot, because sometimes because a lot of times I know they're the only ones that are gonna be able to fix it,
Sure.
or they have the highest odds to fix the problem, and they make fewer mistakes than others.
Sure.
So this, but it's easy to be in a position and go, they made a mistake. I can do that with employees. Then I replace them with somebody worse. I just shot myself in the foot.
Sure. Sure.
It's not an emotional business. The more emotion and ego you put into it, the less money you make.
Interesting. I like that. And then, as we were talking about underwriting, one part of that is going on a property tour. So any, particular questions that you suggest that, potential owners, when they're visiting prospective property, ask?
You're talking about that original tour where they originally look at the asset?
Exactly. And they're thinking about, hey, should we put an LOI?
So pretty basic stuff, go in armed with some information. Don't just show up. You should have driven the property for 30, 40 minutes. You should have walked around it, seeing if there's some siding peeling off of the side of the wall, seeing if there's places where there's large pieces of sidewalks that you can see have new concrete, and so that there's maybe been a lot of sewer replacements, where you see, or you see big trenches around the property, or let's say it's during a rainy period, you see a lot of puddling. You should be looking at that stuff before you show up. And you shouldn't be showing up like you're a prince or a king and having somebody escort you around the property. You go in there and you look around before you get there. You drive the property. You maybe drive it, depending on how dangerous it is. You maybe roll by the property when it's dark and see if people are walking around. You may drive in the middle of the day, see if there's a lot of cars in the parking lot. That's not a good sign. Or if people are walking around in the middle of the day, they're probably not employed. There's things like that. A lot of times what I'll look at is the eaves of the roof to see if there's water damage. Then it'll give me some insight whether there's roof damage. And those are the things that you become prepared before you do the tour. Once you're on the tour, you make sure that you're polite, right? Be somebody that people like. Don't come in there like you're a king and everybody's below you, because they'll be less forthright with information. That's not good.
Sure.
And you want them to be as forthright with information as possible. You ask the very basic thing, occupancy. Ask, what is your turnover rate? When I ask, what is your turnover rate? It's almost never reality. You'll have to go check against that. And then you'll get to know, it's not even usually integrity. You'll just get to know by asking those questions that aren't just occupancy and how many do you have pre-leased. You say, how many do you have turnover? If the manager's closer to what it really is when you fact check it, then they're a more sophisticated person that's going to be easier to work with. If they're not, you're going to have to handicap for that and do that stuff. So there's items like that. You ask the basic questions. Do you have major sewer issues? Do you have any major roof issues? See what they say. Read their their nonverbal cues. And then I always like to say, and it depends on the size of the asset. Let's say it's a 100-unit deal. And if the manager's been there, always ask the manager how long she's been there. She's been there 2 weeks. Then, that's something to keep in mind, that they've had some turnover at the manager position. But they've been there a long time. You say, look, this 100-unit deal, Maria, if I gave you $1 million and you had to put it into the property and you were rated on what gave us the best payback, what would make the clients the happiest, where we raise the most, what would you do?
Great question.
And if she says, I'd put in cameras, a lot of lights, and security services, then then gives you some insight, right? She's like, I changed the whole sewer system, this entire property.
That gives you some insight.
Then it'll give you some insight. You have to take those responses with a grain of salt. You have to see who's saying it and whether they've really thought through what they're telling you. But it is something good to kind of see what the person in the trenches thinks. And sometimes it makes sense and sometimes it's nonsense. So there's just kind of different things. So that's one question. Look at the eaves, see if there's water damage. Look if there's places where water's puddling. Look at just normal wear and tear things.
Okay.
Typically, we will be involved with most of these tours of Israel, or one of our maintenance supervisors. With, most of these deals, people are at least attempting to get Fannie or Freddie debt. So he'll look at certain other aspects in terms of what type of breaker box they have in the units. It's a little bit in the weeds. Most of your audience isn't going to know. They're going to have to come to a professional like us to figure that out.
Sure.
But are they, is it aluminum? Is it copper? If it's copper, there's things that Fannie and Freddie do not require. If it's aluminum, there's a lot of things that they do require in terms
Sure.
of breaker boxes. We'll go take a look at, what are the age? If it's a chiller, what's the age of the chiller? If it's a boiler, what's the age of the boiler? The roof, what's the age of the roof? Those are major systems that cost a lot of money.
Sure. Yeah.
Dissuade people from asking, what type of floor are they using and what paint color do they have? I mean, who cares?
Yeah, who cares?
Right?
You can change that quickly.
Yeah, you can change that. So if they say, well, the boiler's fine. I mean, I think it's 35 years old. Then, you just got to be aware of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Got a budget for
chiller, or if they kind of hem-haw and avoid the question and dodge the question, then
sure.
You have to use your common sense.
Yeah,
right?
For sure. Now, just going back to properties that you would buy, would you buy a chiller property for your personal portfolio?
I would buy anything if it's, as the market's tighter, there's a lot of things that if the market was, if the liquidity dried up and I got to pick what I wanted, I'd go for pitched roof, separately metered, all that stuff.
Okay.
Right now, I'm just looking for a good value.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And I have a saying, but you may want to edit this out later, but I tell people I would buy a steaming pile of shit for $5 if the market valued it at $9. If that makes any sense to you, right?
Perfect sense.
Yeah. So I think personally, I feel more comfortable, but this is more of a personal thing. I personally like to own things in major metros.
Okay.
But there's a lot of people that do very well with, and a lot of our clients that do very well in the Wichita Falls and Abilenes of the markets, and the Killeen and the Temples of the world. So that is just a personal preference on my own. I just feel more comfortable kind of being in blue chip cities.
Okay.
You're talking about San Antonio, DFW. If I found something around Oklahoma City, that's where I feel more comfortable being. And I think my theory behind it is typically there's more diverse economies. If the chicken processing plant goes broke in the middle of Dallas, we probably wouldn't even fill it. If you're out in Lawton, Oklahoma, you might lose 30% of your tenancy.
Sure.
Right?
Sure. There's more risk there.
Mm-hmm.
More risk. So how much do you look into the financials and the rent roll and, look
very
at
detailed.
Very detailed. Okay. For you personally.
Yeah. I mean, and some of that, your audience I'd really suggest I have a 10-minute video. You've seen it, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. And they can kind of get into what we do on the financials. I mean, when we if we create a relationship, or you get a T12 or rent roll on an off-market deal, or if you get a regular marketed deal, you go right to our website, WehnerMultifamily.com, and then you upload it to the portal. It's a $100 fee. For that, we'll do a full underwriting of the deal, how we would run it. And that underwriting will include a physical market survey by our team with individuals that match the demographic of the subject property. So they'll shop the subject property and all the competitive properties nearby. We'll typically get better, more accurate information than going on CoStar or ALM. They're all great services, but they're based on surveys, and they don't take into account a lot of the things with what improvements do those properties have. That particular property right next to a 50-acre park, it's going to get a little bit more rent, or that property has this, that, or the other thing. It'll usually just compare by age and other factors. And so you get a more detailed look at it, and it's based on when our employee goes there, somebody in our team that matches demographic, it's based on them acting like they're renting an apartment. So they see the finish outs, they see what the competitors are doing. And like, if you or me went to a lot of these properties and pretended to shop, well, me, I have, overgrown hair and I wear Target t-shirts, so I'd probably be okay. But a lot of the times these managers will know that you're just shopping. So you get their answers when they think you're shopping, right?
Sure.
Versus when you are over there and they think that you're actually looking for an apartment, you get the true skinny on what they're renting things for and all that. And so we do that. So that $100 fee, we don't break even. I lose money on that. It's really a method for us to not be just sent a million deals that people just get spammed from a broker. So it's really want a little bit of skin in the game so that we know we're looking at something that the person's looked at. And typically we really think that the client should have done an underwriting themselves to see if there's some level of interest. Now, we don't want your underwriting. We want to start flat-footed and see if the numbers align. But we want to do it ourselves, and we want the client to have a look through it and not just upload everything that they get put in their email box.
Sure.
So, and then we'll go through how many employees would we need there, where are they on revenue right now, where can it grow to, and then we'll do that preliminary forecast. And it'll give you an idea of whether you want to make an offer or where, in terms of pricing, you want to make an offer.
No, that's great. That's great. We'll definitely put a link to that because I think a lot of people will be interested in.
I'm sorry to keep plugging. But
no,
it's in my blood.
We've used your service and it's great. So we appreciate that.
And I can't help it. I'm always marketing myself.
You come across as quite humble, so I appreciate that. So two last questions for you just as we wrap up. And this has been fantastic, Ryan. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you.
What are your 3 biggest lessons learned from your time in multifamily and managing the almost 26,000 units that you've managed?
Oh my gosh, that's a loaded question. I think the biggest lesson is, and you'll see me repeat it on the video a few times, is that you make your money on the purchase, not on the sell. So that is something that you have to plan. I don't have plans for my business growth, but on an apartment building, I have very specific plans. The first year, I've looked at every single, we've looked at on a 100-unit deal, if I'm buying it or somebody else is buying it, we've looked at minimum 30,000 data points on the interiors and probably 150 data points on the exteriors. Look, we look at 300 plus data points per interior. Wow. And then we have it broken down by cost and what needs to be replaced and everything. And you can get more information about our technology from the video, and I can talk to anybody who wants to talk to me about it later. I can kind of go into detail. We could talk for 2 hours about our due diligence.
For sure.
But you do the homework up front, it raises your odds of success tenfold. Okay, so that's the biggest lesson. And you learn that lesson. I learned that lesson in 2009, not in 2000. A lot of people aren't learning that in 2014, 15, 16, 17, and 18 because the market it's been a parachute for a lot of people, saving them, right? Yes. Where they didn't operate it well, but they were still able to sell for 15, 20% more 2 years later.
Just a cap rate compression.
It's very likely that party is over. I've been at when the party ended, my assets, I didn't lose any of them and had cash flow during the downturn. Mm-hmm. Of course, on paper, my net worth was less, but what I was receiving every month was the same.
Sure.
So I could live to fight another day. That is the important part, is that you know what you're getting into, you're prepared for it. The market may not cooperate with you on the exit plan that you have. It may not cooperate. You need to be able to live through it and hand your investors or yourselves checks during that period. And if you can do that, investors in that environment will be fine waiting another 2 or 3 years for the market to correct. So that's the biggest thing. You make your money when you purchase the asset, not when you sell it. Yeah. I can't say that enough. Secondly is, look, we're in CMB class management. If the success of your business or your or your satisfaction or your expectations to be met is that we have to have equivalent to a PhD in the front office of the the property, you're not going to be successful in this business. I mean, this is the properties afford, somewhere from $40,000 to $65,000 a year in salary. So things need to be built, set up very simply for those people to be successful and to focus on the things that move the needle in terms of revenue and the dropping of expenses. They don't need to count toilet paper squares because you have a neat spreadsheet that does that, right? So we don't need to, you know what I mean? So
Sure,
these things, this has to be a formula that works for the resources that you have in this business, right? That's a big lesson that many people from technical backgrounds that have a very high IQ, they really have to consciously think about it in terms of EQ of who they're working with and how to be successful with those parameters.
Sure.
It's not to say that the people we're hiring are not very smart. They're very smart. They have to, a lot of them can interact with the public better than I can and know how to do things better than I can. Typically, they don't have, a quarter of their day to spend on filling out reports and, writing dissertations every other day. It's not a good use of their time.
Sure.
In terms of a third thing, just have plan B and C set up. And I'm the type of person, and it's probably made me more conservative, that I like to win all the time. I'm okay with having only a small win or a big win, but I don't go for the grand slam or strikeout. A failure hurts me more than a success makes me feel good. So I really kind of go into things that almost, you can't say no matter what, but in most contingent situations, I'm going to come out having made money, having had a successful assignment.
Great. Ryan, that was fantastic. I think the listeners are really going to appreciate everything that you had to say today. I know we could go on for hours because you have a wealth of knowledge.
Let's do a follow-up. Maybe if you get your listeners and they say, hey, I'd really like to know this part, or if I'm getting responses like that, then we can do kind of a Ryan Squared 2.0.
Let's do it. It was meant to be, I guess.
Our podcast Ryan Squared, right?
So last question for you is, how can the listeners get in touch with you?
Okay, the best way to get in touch with me is to originally go through, I'd love to give out my phone number, but it's at this point I would receive too many phone calls and I wouldn't be able to give the attention to anybody. So I'd really like it to go to, on an email, it would go to info at wehnermultifamily.com. WEHNER multifamily.com. And I think you're going to share a link with my website or the video.
Absolutely.
And then they can reach the office at 214-821-1533.
Okay.
And in those scenarios, either I or one of our part of our leadership team will reach out to you within 24 to 48 hours, if not sooner.
Great.
If
Ryan,
it is something where you email us, I do want to tell people this: if they're emailing us something of, hey, I'd like you to get back to me, and they need something underwritten. So I'm going to go real quick, and you can cut this out if you need to or whatever, but I just want to get this part. If they're looking at some off-market deal, when they submit something to our online portal, it's 5 business days. That's what our policy is, to return that. If there is something that needs, not just because somebody's really curious, but there's an offer that they have to make quickly or something, then they're going to have to call the office to get through and say, hey, I need this quicker. That's very important. We don't want to give it to you 3 days after the final offers were due.
Sure.
It's going to do you any good. And so if there's any scenario like that, then they're going to have to, reach out to us and go, this needs to go faster. Otherwise, it'll just take 5 days. And
awesome.
There'll always be, after you get your report, there'll be communication that you'll have with Fernando and or me or somebody else in the business.
Great. Well, Ryan, thanks again for all your time. This was fantastic. I'm sure the listeners are going to love listening to it.
I got to do my marquee, right?
Awesome. Well, thanks again.
I appreciate you, Ryan. Thank you so much. You have a good one, man.
All right.
I appreciate you putting me on this. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Multifamily Rockstars. We hope this episode was helpful for your personal and professional growth. For more episodes and to learn more about investing in multifamily apartments, check out lifechangingcapital.com.